All right, just about 10 seconds, Bill. Here we go. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Simulmedia Live. My name is Matt Collins, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Simulmedia. Thank you so much for joining us for today's live stream. You know, when we first started this endeavor of not only going to a remote form of live streaming, but also in really thinking carefully about the guests that we wanted to have on the show, I remember having a conversation with Simulmedia CEO Dave Morgan and thinking about the moment, of course, which we were just on the precipice of having to face this disruption to our public health, our sense of safety, our security, but also the economy. And I remember saying to him that, oh, I wish that we could talk to Erwin Efron right now. And for those of you who don't know, I consider Erwin Efron, the late Erwin Efron, to be a sort of founding father of modern media planning. And so many of the concepts that we consider about the value of recency, the value of reach versus frequency, are things that Erwin pioneered many, many years ago and has written extensively. And I encourage people who are watching this who want to know how to properly really learn media planning as a craft to study Erwin. And I said to Dave, boy, I wish we could have Erwin on Simulmedia. And I was sort of saying that in a way that was just more of a longing than a serious idea. But Dave said, well, I can get you the next best thing, and that's Bill Harvey. And I said, that's a fantastic idea. And so today we're going to be talking to Bill. But before I introduce Bill properly into the program, I want people watching this to know just who we have on the show and why it's so important, I think, that we have him right now. So, as I mentioned, we're now doing the show remotely, but we've been featuring guests who bring a strong point of view about how to make better decisions in this moment that I described. Decisions that are not reactive, but are based on sound principles and on experience from having been through hard times before. And Bill Harvey, our guest today, certainly fits that bill, and he's, no pun intended, and he's going to share that with us. So Bill is the CEO of Bill Harvey Consulting, but his background is so impressive, and I'm just going to lay this out. Bill led strategy for the American Research Bureau, which later became Arbitron. He invented the area of dominant influence, or ADI for short, which is an audience-based definition of television markets that Nielsen emulated as the DMA, and which was called Sales and Marketing Magazine called, quote, the most widely used marketing tool in the industry today. He's also been mentored and tutored by Mike Drexler, Helen Johnston, and the aforementioned Erwin Efron, and many, many more. These are legends in our space. And so having the opportunity to speak directly to someone who has been so core to the foundation of the techniques that we take for granted that are so provenly valuable today is such a pleasure. And talking with Bill many, many times before this conversation, it became apparent to me that my longing for the voice of Erwin Efron would be more than fulfilled by bringing on Bill Harvey into our conversation. And so with that, Bill, thank you so much for joining us here on Simulmedia Live. It's wonderful to have you.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Bill, I want to get right into our questions. And these are questions, by the way, that I've asked several other people who have a strong point of view about the current climate that we're in and what it's going to take to navigate through it and what life might be like on the other side. And in broad brushstrokes, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So I want to start with an acknowledgement that in today's climate, it's probable that marketing organizations, brands, and agencies have one, maybe two generations of employees, younger employees, who've never seen anything quite like this moment. And then of course, there are marketers who may have forgotten the playbook that was maybe it helped see them through the 2008, 2009 global recession. And so I'm wondering, Bill, what advice are you giving marketers and agencies today about the climate that we're in and how to get through to the other side?
What I've been saying is that they should stay present, that they shouldn't be perceived as abandoning their customers and their prospects to deal with the situation alone. If you look at World War II, uh, two big cereal companies went into World War II with about the same market share. That was Kellogg's and Post Cereals. And Post Cereals wasn't present, didn't continue to advertise during the war. Kellogg's did. And Kellogg's came out at the end of the war with double the market share of Post Cereals and has maintained that lead right up until now. There's many cases out of World War II and out of the 2008 collapse that apply. But I think this is an unprecedented event. This is possibly the biggest challenge the human race has ever faced. Or it's kind of World War II for civilians. So it's very important. Every brand is now under a microscope. People have more time to keep up with the social media and so on, spending more time checking what's going on in the crisis and keeping a scorecard of good guys and bad guys in their estimation. So I've been advising two things. One, stay present and change the messaging, make it really a mirror to the heroism of the human race. Find the heroes who are staying on the streets doing what's needed. And at the same time, this will have the effect of keeping up the morale of people, encouraging them, keeping them courageous, which of course is going to increase their immune system response. But the other thing that I think is crucially important is to donate money to save lives. So somebody who's done all of those things, kind of the best that I've seen is the Budweiser One Team ad. Everyone should look at that ad. It celebrates the unity that we have as one team finally. It's not the usual two-team situation. Everybody's on the same side now. And our fighters are men and women. Every single one of us are fighters in this battle. And Budweiser's in it with us. And so it shows how Budweiser thoughtfully decided to use the money he was going to put into sports, which is now off the air, $5 million, and donated to us so that stadia could be turned into field hospitals. But they didn't talk about that until the last second or two of the commercial. Wisely, most of the commercial was, of course, not commercial at all, but a 30-second story about what's going on and the heroism of people standing up to it. Different kinds of people, from people who take away the garbage to people who are in the hospitals, right in the breath of the disease. And then in the last 2 minutes, just mentioning that that's why we've done what we've done, and showing a picture of a stadium. So that, to me, that's what I've been recommending. And it's heartening that the ANA came out with a report of a survey today that more than 90% of advertisers have already changed their messaging. Of course, it's not all as good as that Budweiser spot. Not all companies donated yet, but I think more and more will as they realize the situation and how serious it is to the public.
Bill, you talk about shifting the creative message, and you and I talked in preparation for this about don't abandon the people who need you most in the time of need, but also the importance of making sure that brands are useful to their customers. But let's talk about what brands should do right now, not just in revising the creative, but talk about what you know so well, and that's the media strategy component of this. What should brands and their advertisers be doing right now when it comes to pairing the right media strategy to go with the revised creative strategy?
I think it's very important to use proven media and proven research tools. And anything that isn't proven is what, if we're going to cut anything, that's what should be cut, is the use of unproven tools and unproven media. you don't want to, if you are going to be cutting back because of economic necessity, you don't want to be cutting muscle. And the latest study that came out was, I actually had something to do with it, a Fox Bill Harvey consulting study, which covered 5.5 years of ad spend in the US in three major categories that represent about half of all national advertising dollars: auto, CPG, and QSR. And it's a correlational study. And it shows that this is with $48 billion in ad spend and 2.2 trillion in sales being measured. It shows that there are five media types that are muscle, five muscle types. The one that came up highest is known by various names: OTT, CTV, streaming, AVOD, FEP for full episode player. It's essentially television shows being watched in some digital form or another, often on a TV set, but with a digital IP connection rather than a cable type connection. And this turns out to be far more powerful than any other form of TV or any form of digital. So that's number one on the list of things not to cut, in fact, to test the increase of. And secondly, two forms of live television came up very strongly: sports and news. Of course, sports isn't really an option at the moment. Let's look at news. The interesting thing, of course, although the news ratings are skyrocketing, advertisers are not happy about putting their ads into news. In fact, in those three product categories, only about 1% of the ad spend over that 5.5 year period was in news. However, the news has always been shown to have higher attention, and it generates higher commercial recall. And also, if you have an upbeat news commercial that comes on after the bad news, there's a mood repair effect. The commercial has more effect than it would have had in a happy environment. Contrast in that case is a positive one. So for all those reasons, the advertisers shouldn't abandon the news. And in fact, the news should become much more of a chronicle of human heroism, just like the ads that I'm recommending, the non-ad ads that I'm recommending. It's all about human beings and their fight against this disease, how we can support them, stand with them. The other
We're going
media
to be
type,
talking. So
the
go
other
ahead,
media
Bill,
type,
finish your thought.
the Fox study also came to the conclusion that the other two media types that are generally muscle. One is the integrated brand integrations, sponsorships on television, which was very powerful. And then television itself continues to show more power than the average of all digital. But the very, very strong form of television network digital is at the top of the list.
That's great advice, and I'm glad that you surfaced that, because I think right now it's inevitable that organizations are taking a hard look at their media investments and are reverting to exactly the conversation that you described, Bill, which is, what are those things that we can keep, that we have to keep because they are provably productive, and what are those things that are harder to prove and therefore should be among the first to get trimmed. And having uh, that list that you just provided is extraordinarily useful. But let's talk about what is certainly going on in organizations everywhere, and that's the knock on the door that the CFO has for the CMO, and the CFO comes in and says, "Hey, CMO, we need some money back. We need you to just cut." Uh, what's the best way for the CMO to respond to the CFO?
Well, there's a temporary situation going on here that requires extraordinary thinking. Even though you might not be making the sales you were expecting to make in Q2, you should have two plans for Q3, even if you're going to be cutting back in Q2. And you shouldn't cut it to the bone in Q2, because then you'll be seen as abandoning the consumer in their time of need. That would be a very bad backfire kind of thing to do. But one can cautiously test the withdrawal of funds in the less proven categories. basically all the categories except the ones I mentioned, and even um, general television, some parts of it might be tested to be reduced, but not the most powerful parts, not the news part, not the OTT part. And you still want reach, so you're going to need a balance of other programming. You're going to want to buy it smarter, which means you're not going to want to tolerate the rotations against their sex age groups. You're going to want to target programs to be the right contexts for your specific ads, as well as reaching people who are motivated by the motivations that are in your ads. You're going to want to use data-driven methods and optimizers like Simulmedia does, and all of the smart money is moving to. So the other thing that I would say to the CFO is, look, we can test these things. Random control trials are the way of knowing for sure whether something is going to work or not. We've been using a proxy, attribution methods, which are essentially correlational, but we haven't been using the experimental king of the hill in terms of absolute certainty, and that's random control trials. But companies like 605 now are doing random control trials across platform, doing digital and TV combined. And they're able to do, it's hard to do random control trials in TV because you want to have a control group that doesn't get the messages. Well, in broadcast, the messages go where they wilt. So they're using addressable television so they can totally control the messaging. So you can do a quick random control trial of anything you want. More news, less news, more OTT, less OTT, more XYZ, less XYZ. And you can know for sure what the effects are, not just against attributed sales, but actual measured incremental sales, not sales you would have made anyway, which is a lot of what we get when we do attribution if we don't do it perfectly. But with random control, you're automatically looking at the incremental sales, the new customers, which is much more important. So the use of random control trials should be increased, especially now, as we lean on things that are proven and abandon things. If we're going to back up some spend, let's back it up on the things that have the least proof.
So this is really valuable advice for a CMO. And I think what I'm hearing broadly that you recommend, Bill Harvey, is that the CMO learn to speak the language of the CFO. And in this case, the CFO is obviously looking for money back that they can preserve in the budget to keep powder dry. And so it'll be important for the CMO to talk in terms that the CFO can understand using the currency of that language, but also to recognize that uh, there is uh, there is value. There's positive value to the organization in media, knowing what media is performing well for you, and having a point of view about how to make sure that that media is being deployed as efficiently as possible to get the best possible result. These are all things that will allow the CMO to have a really productive conversation with the CFO, and one that has the chance of enduring beyond the moment. Isn't that right?
I feel that this is our chance to step up to the better marketing that we always knew was there. Marketing and innovation are the two active functions of a corporation, according to Peter Drucker. And building brands, building brand equity long term contributes mightily to the overall value of a corporation and its stock. But we've gotten into short term thinking, and we're looking at the current quarter's analyst call and what the short term numbers are going to show. So we've rotated too far away from brand building and too much toward generating those sales, even if they're promotion driven sales, that they're unprofitable sales. They're still something that looks good at the end of the quarter. And that's not what we have to do now. We have to think more long range. This whole situation is a wake up call. We can't go back to the old ways of marketing. We have to get better right now and keep it better.
Well, and you describe the ways to do that. The ways to address this moment are actually things that are, generally speaking, the right things no matter the circumstances. So we talk about maximizing unique audience reach. We talk about having an eye towards the emotional undertone of your message and making sure it meets up with the medium. We talk about an audience-based approach, a data-driven approach. And when we talk about data-driven at Simulmedia, we talk about it being audience-driven, meaning especially in the context of advertisers who've had their sports lineup disrupted. Now they've got to find those audiences, but elsewhere. So knowing who you're targeting and having a plan to maximize the reach of that target audience, no matter what they're watching, these are all things that are just make for smart marketing in the future. It's actually a really good segue to my final question, which I'll get to in a moment. But before I do, I want to remind everybody that we're talking to Bill Harvey of Bill Harvey Consulting, I would say one of the founding fathers, if you will, of modern media planning, who has so much to teach us about the right way to do this and to back it up with research that's going to be able to prove to the CEO, the CFO, the shareholders that advertising is effective. If you have a question for Bill, just ask it in whatever form you're watching, whether that's Zoom or LinkedIn or Periscope. You can ask that question. We have people with eyes on each of those feeds, and we'll get those questions to Bill before we adjourn. But all of this talk, Bill, about the future and where we go next has me thinking about I think the question that's on everybody's minds as a really important thought exercise is, what should we do now to prepare for something resembling a resumption of normal life coming out of this? What are you recommending to marketers and agencies right now?
Well, first of all, it could happen as soon as July 1. If you look at the shape of the curve of the standard model being used, we come to the peak around mid-April, and then we start to get the better of it, and then the long tail kind of disappears by July 1. Now, it may not go that way, but let's hope it goes that way or better. And if it does, then it's possible that we're going to have a very big Q3, a time where we're going to want to perhaps increase spending. But before talking about level of spending, let's start from the core of it all. The core is, you're in some business making some product. The product actually does something for people, for their experience of life. It makes it better. And that's why you're doing what you're doing. The ads have to go back to that core. They have to promise what you can really deliver, the real product experience, the real value to the individual. And then the combination of the ad campaign and the experience of the product in combination will create a payoff experience which will be just what the ads promised. And then you'll have a virtuous cycle, and you'll have people who are satisfied and involved and love the brand and tell other people about it in positive ways. So that's the general marketing umbrella. And it has special application now when we have to keep people's morale up. We have to stay with them in their fight and help them win it. We have to save lives. We have to donate money. We have to show the heroes in our non-ad ads. And then as we transition back into the new normal, let's hope the rocking 20s, the good new days, when we see spurts in travel and going to the movies and all kinds of consumer spending, because people realize how happy they are, how good they have it, how good they've always had it and never realized it until now they really realize it. That could make for quite a boom quarter. And that spirit could make for some wonderful emotional commercials from a more positive viewpoint than we're able to do sensitively during this quarter. And then we need to continue this idea of non-ad ads. I've been talking about non-ad ads for a long time. We do them in the internet. It's called branded content, but we don't do them on television. Why not? There's no reason why not. They work on television. When you do branded integration, you do it right. It's kind of like branded content on digital. But you can do it in 30 seconds. Look at that Budweiser One Team ad. It does it perfectly. We don't need to be in the midst of a crisis in order to continue to do that kind of non-ad ads. Anything that's inspiring and uplifting, anything that reminds us of our own virtues, anything that makes us feel unity with other people, anything that calls attention to life in a positive way, art, music, performance, anything that's important and informative that people can use in their daily lives that they may not have heard of yet. And especially taking on new causes. And in those non-ad ads, talking about the new causes. I think the big new cause that advertisers are going to want to support is the reduction of deforestation, because that's where we got this virus. We got it when we caused the bats to move out of the territory, their habitats, by tearing down forests. So they had to move somewhere. They got closer to human beings. They got, in the case of this coronavirus, they got closer to the pangolins, the armadillo-like anteaters in China that are a delicacy and eaten by human beings. And that's what they were selling at the Wuhan market. So as scientists confirm these speculations, and they've already begun to do so, I first put this idea up on my website on the 30th, and 2 days ago, it's now appearing in popular scientific journals and blogs. So I think I'm right about that. But there will be new causes to champion, and the non-ad allocation. I'm not saying make all the ads that way. Learn to optimize what proportion of the ads are non-ad ads versus regular ads. That can be done again with random control testing. So I'm predicting and hoping for a shift, not throwing out any of our good tools, but adding the random control testing back in. It was a good tool that worked well a long time ago, and it will work even better now across both media. The other thing that we need to prepare for is to support the movement that's already underway. It was started probably by Mark Pritchard and by Jenny Gardner and Ben Jankowski, but now it's a worldwide push by the World Federation of Advertisers and the Association of National Advertisers to make measurement across platform more collaborative, more interoperable, more transparent, continuing to protect privacy, making privacy protection better than ever, perhaps getting to an anonymous universal ID, definitely shortening the supply chain within programmatic. All of these things are part of a movement to reset digital. This company called Reset Digital is kind of in the front ranks of this movement. And we should be prepared to put a lot of weight into this movement and to support our leaders in making it happen, because we have a chance now to have a classy digital, the way we've always had a classy television. We can have the two media being classy, meaning no lack of brand safety, no bad contexts, a good user experience, even the advertising, a good user experience, because we'll know what the total frequency of exposure is to specific ad IDs, specific ads, to specific people. So we don't have to overdo it. We have a chance to make this all better so that consumers aren't mad at advertisers or say that they don't like advertising. Just change the nature of advertising. We don't have to change the nature of the relationship. Brands and people have always had a good relationship. Whenever the brands remember why the founders created those brands, hark back to that, and that will lead to a win.
Bill, you're nothing if not an optimist, I would say. You really have I can tell you've got high hopes, and you've spent some time really imagining what this could be like coming out the other side, not just an overflow of good spirits from brands to celebrate this, that eventual moment with customers, but also a cleaning of house, so to speak, as especially the digital side of the operation sort of cleans up its act and becomes the medium it was always meant to be, without the darker underbelly. I'm heartened by your vision of that, and especially now optimism, you can never have too much of it. I want to transition, Bill, to some questions that have come in while we've been talking. There's some great questions that have piled up, and so I'm just going to go in the order in which they were received. Phil asked a great question about local markets, and so I'm just going to read you his question, Bill. Phil wants to know, in local market radio and TV, marketing and media budgets tend to be modest. and many local companies don't have the budgetary muscle to implement complex strategies. What are your thoughts on how local companies, many of whom are now seeing drastic reduction in calls, customers, and sales, can best survive and position for the turnaround? Great question, Phil, and thank you.
Thanks, Phil. I totally agree. Uh, I have myself a company called RMT, which has one of its predictive models is called HIOPS, which stands for hyperlocal opportunities. The thing is, years ago, I discovered that brands grow in an S curve, and different markets are at different points on the S curve for a given brand. And you can find the places where the brand is still in the fast growth part of the S curve. And national advertisers can allocate local funds there. There's been a huge shift away from national advertisers buying locally, except in a couple of product categories. And mostly it's because it's more work for the agency and it went against the tide of the procurement, pushed down on agency compensations, which is a whole separate topic. But local media need to make the story. They need to do the research, and it's not that expensive to do the research. IRI in the CPG category, for example, has store level data that it sells relatively inexpensively for a local area. And it can be compared to national norms to show that your market is a place where a number of different CPG brands should be heavying up because they're still in the fast growth stage. And Polk has great, also affordable data in terms of the car category. So I think the resurgence in local media is something that I failed to mention, but happens to be one of the things that Irwin mentioned to me in the last 6 months of his life.
So it sounds like, Bill, your recommendation for someone who's seeing right now the drastic effects of reduction in sales in local markets, if you're a local brand serving, say, the Poughkeepsie market area, and they're wondering, geez, what do we do? We don't have the big wallets. I'm inferring from your response that actually there is a data-driven approach that you can take to figure out what's the right level of investment to put into the market, depending on where you are in growth within that market. But that I'm assuming here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the same principles we talked about earlier would apply here, which is find a way if you can to change your message to fit the moment. Find a way if you can to keep the most productive media going so that your customers still hear from you, even if it's not to sell, but rather to be there to boost morale. Am I capturing that correctly?
Absolutely. Radio is a perfect example. The live read on radio is a sleeping giant in terms of its ROI impact. People trust the voice of the community on the radio, and we're not doing enough of that. And it's powerful for national advertisers to use. What I'm suggesting is, yes, the local advertisers, you can get them to do the right thing. You can help advise them to do the right thing. Buy more radio is certainly part of the right thing. Uh, Local cable and local broadcast are wonderful media. Local broadcast has great fast reach, like Simulmedia buys. You know, it's kind of optimized for great fast reach. Some high-rated syndicated shows and so on, high-rated local news, and local cable has great geographic specificity and the availability of household level specificity. Those are wonderful media to test, and you can use random control trials to quickly and inexpensively test a whole bunch of things and find things out. And that goes for local advertisers too. But don't overlook the national advertisers coming into local markets. They've been overlooking that for many years. If we're going to really make a fresh start here, that's part of it.
Bill, do you have time for a few more questions? So we've got about three or four more that have piled up. Are you okay on time?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And Phil, thanks again for your question. Charles has come up with a question regarding your mention of the Budweiser spot, Bill. Charles says he agrees that the Budweiser approach is fantastic, but how many marketers can replicate it? Or put another way, how many similar approaches will come across as truly authentic versus just copycat or missing the mark?
It's a very difficult challenge creatively. It's a hard act to follow. But I'll give you some examples of other approaches which um, could be powerful. For example, people complain about the salaries that CEOs make, the salaries and bonuses that CEOs make. I could see a CEO deciding to give his bonus to some of the people he just laid off. You know, there's 27 million people in the US who work part time. Everything the Small Business Administration is doing right now is pretty much focused on the payroll, which means full time employees rather than the 1099 employees. You know, hopefully some of them will get some consideration. But um, beyond what the SBA is doing, companies can donate to support a higher spend than the government has mandated. So let's say you're a bank, and of course now you're making these, $350 billion in forgiven loans, or mostly forgiven, conditionally forgiven loans, and that's going to be an enormous help. But what if you decide to give more than that, give more loans than that, or what if you decide, hey, some of those young people who are still at their jobs because they can't afford not to be, who are still risking their lives to keep the trucks rolling and the delivery packages coming and so on and so forth. And they're not all that young. Some people in the endangered age range are even doing it. But um, what about forgiving their school loans, their college loans? If they're doing heroic service for the community, what about a bank saying, here, we're going to add another billion of our own, or whatever the number might be? I think there are creative ideas to be found. And frankly, we need more of the creative ideas. It isn't just throwing money at it or just, checking the box. If these things aren't creatively, Charles is absolutely right. That's the hard part, is the creativity. And now with people having to create spots from social distancing positions, as in-house agencies come to the fore and are doing much more of it than ever before, and maybe we'll hold on to it more as a result in the future. Who knows? Um, Creativity is needed. The agencies have a lot of it. They should be tapping the ideas, even if they do the production in-house at the advertiser end. They shouldn't fail to tap the creativity of their agencies.
Charles, thank you for that question. Actually, it dovetails very nicely into the next question we have, Bill. This one comes from Robert, and he wants to know, how do we as marketing professionals, and especially researchers, make the case against treating creative as quote unquote widgets, like it's some sort of a commodity?
It's hilarious, isn't it?
No, it's
It
crazy.
the um, What I'm recommending in terms of the agency compensation approach is new contracts which have a protected, separated budget called the freedom budget, or whatever you want to call it, where it has nothing to do with the guaranteed reach against the buying target that's in all the agency contracts right now. Right now, all the agency contracts that I know of, 100% of the budget has to be spent against guaranteeing a certain number of impressions and reach against, over a course of a year, against a sex age group. That's just silly. Sex age has been shown to be not predictive of ROI. It's not, shouldn't even be called targeting, but um, at least take 20% of the budget and let the CMO use it to do things, big ideas, test big ideas, new things, and not have the agency be able to answer, no, we're not going to reach into our own pocket to make up the guarantee because this is the contract says we're going to deliver these impressions. Have a part of the budget where that does not apply. And also some incentive for the agency if it makes a third party ROI or brand equity goal. There's got to be an upside for the agency to counteract the damage that's been done by the widget and ball bearing thinking.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also point to a wider study that Nielsen Catalina did not that long ago to look at the factors that contribute to campaign success. And the biggest single source of performance by percentage was creative. Creative was responsible for 47% of campaign outcomes. And so, with that much at stake, I don't know that you want to, any organization could even tolerate the notion that it becomes commoditized, either in its sourcing or in the ideation or its delivery. The creative has enormous potential to impact results. And And we'd all be wise to recognize that, even if it's something that's a little bit harder to measure. It can seem ephemeral at times, but it is vitally important that organizations treat creative as a real opportunity for differentiation. Robert, thank you very much for that question. We've got just a couple more. This question comes from Anonymous. Given that news networks are so segmented, would you recommend spending across all three of the major news networks?
I would definitely do that. First of all, it's a reach opportunity. Second of all, it shows that the advertiser is into unity and divisiveness. And the news networks themselves should step up. They have an opportunity here to be the chroniclers of human heroism and not be backbiting and complaining and hating and complaining. the, Certainly the population wants encouragement and wants unity. It doesn't want disunity right now. And just back to the creative point, we can't talk about the creative enough. While he was alive, Erwin Efron convinced me, and perhaps many of us, that advertising is a weak force, that it doesn't have the same impact as a great product experience or an endorsement from a friend who has no bias and nothing to gain or lose. And so that became part of my thinking. My thinking was advertising is a weak force. But the thing is, when you pay attention to the creative, so my company RMT tries to place the creative into the context that has the same psychological underpinning as the ad itself. And when you do that, you find that even a single exposure can have dramatic effect. So if we do our best with the creative and also to present the creative in a place where it's going to be exalted, it's not going to be a weak force. And people can test that with random control trials and see for themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. Here's a question that comes in also from an anonymous questioner. How do you characterize YouTube? Is it television? Is it digital? Something wholly different?
Well, YouTube has been called non-premium, such as in the study that I did with Fox. So it was non-premium digital video, meaning not created by the professional, Hollywood community, creative community, New York creative community, the usual creative people, but it draws on everybody. I was teaching a class by telepresence last week, and the kids in the class all want to be in marketing, and they all are predisposed to social media, and they wanted to hear some good news. And so I told them that what's coming next is going to be something much more like the Adobe Creative Cloud for students, for people that don't have a lot of money, that goes beyond TikTok and Mashable, really makes professional quality origination possible for individuals. And at that point, the distance between professional and non-professional will be much closer than it is today. They got kind of excited by that idea. And but until we get there, there is a difference. There's at least two major differences between the OTT, CTV type of digital video and the YouTube type. One is the context. You're watching an enjoyable thing that you wanted to watch, and an ad comes on. Or you're going to a thing that you want to watch, and before you can watch it, something pops up and interrupts and says, skip me in 5 seconds. So, which is a better experience from the standpoint of the brand, but even from the standpoint of the viewer, which is the better experience? Apparently, judging from the Fox data, if the premium stuff has a much better experience for the consumer, and therefore it has more impact. But there is impact also to the non-premium. In fact, Fox points out that they didn't find any media that aren't productive under the right conditions.
I'll point out something that I saw today, Bill Harvey, that was published by ThinkBox TV, an organization I'm sure you're familiar with. They put out some terrific research on television and video, and They published a report today that indicated that while YouTube and Facebook video in particular do show impressive top line reach numbers against especially younger demographics, the under 24 set, those numbers fall off the cliff when you layer on, are they completing ads? Are they even watching 50% of ads that are served to them, much less 100%? And when you look at those numbers, the medium collapses as a reach vehicle. So they're being watched, but I think it speaks to what you just illustrate, which is that the ad experience on a lot of these non-premium digital video products have not yet captured the kind of environment that brands really crave and need in order to drive that kind of high reach, high engagement with customers. So I found that to be very timely, given the fact that I'm sure a lot of companies are evaluating their spend these days.
And you know, in the Fox study, the auto, CPG, and QSR categories, what we found is the spending in the non-premium is double the spending in the premium right now. You would think that given the efficacy, it would be flip-flopped the other way, or at least half and half, but not what we see backwards. I think that's going to
But
change, really,
yeah,
when
I
people
agree.
start to random control trials.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that CFOs have a way of, in these moments, of really clarifying the conversation. And I think CFOs coming in and saying, "Well, I know you're spending here, but is it working?" And that to me is going to be, it will be one of the driving considerations in making sure that budget flows to where it's working. In organizations where budget doesn't flow to where it's working, especially when budget becomes more constrained, the results will speak for themselves. So I think over time, especially in the near term, we're going to see that happen more and more. I want to get to our last question. It comes back to us once again from Robert. Um, and I'm very eager to uh, share my own point of view on this. But he says, and more generally, how can we move away from a pure return on ad spend or ROAS focus, Bill, and towards one that pays homage to the long-term positive effects of brands, aka your example of Kellogg's versus Post?
It's crucially important. Take a company like 605. They've begun to use the phrase full funnel measurement, meaning that they do re-interviews of set-top box homes. So the set-top box becomes the measure of, did the ad actually appear on the screen or screen, any device in the home? And then what was the outcome in terms of Millward Brown kind of measures, ASI kind of measures, like first brand mention and awareness, aided brand recall, brand perceptions, brand consideration, intention to buy. All of those things um, can be measured by re-interviews of set-top box homes. So you can link together sales measurements at the bottom of the funnel and top funnel awareness and mid funnel consideration measurements. We also need, and I would suggest people research MASB, M as in mother, A, S as in Sam, B as in boy, Marketing Accountability Standards Board. It is in existence to find how to measure the brand's contribution to the value of the corporation, to do so in a way that's true from both CMO and CFO point of view. And more people need to join that organization. There's a lot of good organizations, collaboration platforms we have as an industry, ARF, ANA, MMA, et cetera. They're all wonderful. And they're coming into their own right now because they're really stepping up and making a greater contribution than ever before. But MASB is one that's working on that specific problem, and it needs our help.
I'll just throw on one other observation, Robert. I appeared with the head of integrated media at Experian on stage at the ANA Brand Masters last month, and we talked about how Experian, which is a Simulmedia client, measures brand. And while they certainly look at changes in awareness and that they can detect as a result of running their television and other media, they also measure based on the ability of media to drive some sort of a digital response. And it's not, I'm not here even talking necessarily about sales or something bottom of funnel, but rather more top of funnel type activities, such as, is this campaign driving a significant volume of people, of potential customers, back to a website, back to an application? If advertising can do that, and if the rest of a company's digital properties are effective at converting traffic, because the product is right and the price is right and the customer experience to checkout is easy, then you can really show that television is working in ways that are both top of funnel to bottom of funnel. It's that sort of full funnel measurement. And some really sophisticated advertisers have layered this in, not as a way of being able to distract or minimize advertising effectiveness as a brand building measure, but just simply provide more granularity to how that effect is measured. And I think to be able to prove back to the rest of the organization, by the way, all of the rest of the organization that's competing for finite dollars for resources, that, hey, when we invest in advertising and when it works, this is how much more engagement we can drive. In addition to, these are how we can change attitudes. So it's great questions from you, Robert, as well as from everybody. Thank you so much. Bill, we've taken up a lot more time than I had anticipated, but I'm so glad, selfishly, that we did. And I want to thank you for coming on Simulmedia Live and talking about your point of view, sharing your optimism, which I think is so valuable right now. And I hope we can have you on again, maybe under some different circumstances, hopefully happier circumstances.
Would love it. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. It's our pleasure. So I want to, before I wrap up the show, I'm just going to do a plug for this Thursday's Simulmedia Live. I'm going to be joined by a very special guest who's going to be bringing a slightly different perspective. I'm going to be joined by Jeff Jarvis, who's the director of the Tow Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at CUNY's Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. And you can find stuff that Jeff has been writing profusely online. And Jeff's got a very strong point of view about the role of journalism in this moment and how advertisers can support journalism at a time when arguably we need it more than ever. So I encourage all of you to join us for Thursday's show. Can't wait to talk to Jeff and hear what he has to say. But in the meantime, I want to thank you all for joining. Thanks for taking time out of very busy days and trying times to be with us. Hope you all stay well, be safe, and we'll see you next time on Simulmedia Live. Bye-bye, everybody.